we now arrive at the point where we have to make some choices. Not yet the big choice, that's not coming till January, but the smaller choice of whether you now stay here for Channel A or go next door for Channel B. If you go over there, you will hear Roland LaPlante of Affiliates Limited talking about lessons learned from previous TLD introductions. So you might say, over there, we'll be looking at the past as a guide to the future, and if you stay in this room, we're going to head straight into the future, because Kurt Pritz is going to tell us more about the new gTLD program. So before I start introducing Mr. Pritz, I'll just give those who decide for Channel B time to get up and go next door. Just bear with us for one moment here for Channel A. Okay. May I ask everybody staying for Channel A to take your places again? Thank you very much. And as I say, we now move ahead with the next item on our Channel A program, and that is a keynote from Kurt Pritz. In 7 years at ICANN, he has held about just every function in the organization, you might say. His current position is aimed at ensuring the growth of the multi-stakeholder bottom-up development model. He also leads ICANN's implementation of the new gTLD program. He delivered the first new planning document 7 years ago, and he coordinated multiple public consultations culminating in the board's decision to launch the program. So nobody knows this program better than Kurt Pritz. Prior to joining ICANN, Mr. Pritz spent nearly a decade at Walt Disney Imagineering as Vice President, Engineering and Production. So he's brought a lot of imagination and creativity to the process as well. We're very pleased to hear him now on what does the new gTLD program offer. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Is the sound good?
Yes.
Great. Well, I've been asked, I'm going to speak in two sessions today. This first one is sort of an introductory session, and I'm concerned that many of you in this room might know more than I, so if you have corrections, keep them to yourselves, and then just let me go on and then tell me later about that. So in line with that introduction, and I'll try to make it as interesting as I can, I'm going to talk a little bit about ICANN and what ICANN is, and domain names in general. So it provides sort of a foundation for how new gTLDs fits into the current space. And then I'll talk about the development of the new gTLD program, how it came about. I think that's important to understand, because then one can realize how we got to where we got to and how certain decisions are made. And in that, as Steve Crocker alluded, some very important parts of that are how we developed rights protection mechanisms and mechanisms to mitigate malicious conduct. And then finally, I'll talk about where to get more information and a tease, so maybe you'll come back to my next talk, or maybe not. Here we go. So a little bit about what is ICANN. When you go to a cocktail party, you're invariably asked, especially if you're a guy, so what do you do for a living? And for any ICANN employee, that's a moment of terror, because the answer is really, well, they have 20 minutes and a whiteboard, and I can take you through it. So I'll give you a couple answers that I give at cocktail parties. First, what ICANN stands for, and then what do we do? So there's a kind of a snappy answer that says we do names, numbers, and protocols. We oversee the domain name system that provides for the registration of top-level domain names, and the domain names we all register as registrants. We allocate IP addresses, and we keep a registry of internet protocols that are developed by the IETF. Technical guidance for how the whole internet is run. And then finally, we facilitate the development of policy in a bottom-up process. So that's what ICANN does. If I've had a little bit to drink and I just want to sort of blow through the question, I tell people that it's a California not-for-profit, multi-stakeholder, private sector-led bottom-up policy development model to ensure DNS technical coordination that acts for the technical benefit of the global internet. But there's some really important words in there if you actually parse it. Multi-stakeholder, what's multi-stakeholder? Well, that's what makes the ICANN model separate from other potential forms of internet governance. It's not a regulated industry. It's not a government-run or government-led sector, but rather it includes all stakeholders, including governments, in the formulation of policy. And it does that in a bottom-up fashion, not a top-down fashion, so led by volunteers. For DNS technical coordination, what's that mean? Well, that's sort of code words for ICANN has a narrow technical mission. Sometimes ICANN's better explained by what we don't do instead of what we do. And that each time we take a step, you'd be surprised, but we use the word, is this step working towards the public interest or the public good? So that's sort of a litmus test. So you can rattle that off your tongue, but it's a pretty good sentence. If I'm feeling philosophical, I'll tell them about ICANN's mission statement, and really it covers three things. We want to keep the internet, we work to keep the internet stable and secure. We work towards the promotion of competition and choice for internet users. And we provide this multi-stakeholder forum where different groups can work out policy difference, and we ensure that a broad base of participants are included in the formulation of internet policy. Finally, if I'm drunk and they do have a whiteboard, I'll draw a diagram for them about the ICANN structure. Well, the font here might be too small to see. It's just important to know that ICANN seeks to take input from many different quarters of the internet community. Our supporting organizations create this bottom-up policy. The address supporting organization addresses IP addresses. The GNSO, generic name supporting organization, makes policy for the generic space, such as new TLDs. The CCNSO addresses the same for country code top-level domains. And then we have the Governmental Advisory Committee with 109 member states and many observers, creating an effective role for governments, and then a number of technical coordination committees that also provide very important input for ICANN. And then finally, there's at-large, right? There's the community at-large that funnels their opinions through the at-large advisory committee. So all these organizations, all these bottom-up volunteer organizations work to facilitate the ICANN model. So as soon as I get done with my 20 minutes of explanation, whoever I'm talking to is really bored. And he'll just look at me and say, well, why don't you do something about spam then? So there's a lot that ICANN doesn't do. We don't get involved in content on the internet. We can't prevent spam. We don't create laws. We are not a regulator. We do facilitate law enforcement activity, and we do facilitate the development of policy for the internet, but we don't get involved in content. So now that that's kind of done, if these slides are public, I think, right? So here's a number. Here's how you find each one of those supporting organizations and advisory committees. So what's a domain name? Well, do you guys know? My things. What am I pointing at when I do this? So everybody here is very familiar with a domain name. And what's the big change here? The big change is we're going to be introducing new names at the top level of the internet. So what are these names? Did I miss this? Did I miss a slide? I don't think so. Okay, so everybody here is very familiar with these different classifications of names, so I won't dwell on them. But clearly, gTLD, as Steve Crocker alluded to, some people think are global top-level domains. which could be good. But they're in the generic space, and essentially I think of them as everything but ccTLD. So there's a ccTLD, a country code top-level domain allocated to each government. gTLDs all have contracts with ICANN. And until today, they've been limited to ASCII characters. And that brings us to internationalized domain names. ICANN has recently facilitated the introduction of internationalized domain names. So for country code top-level domains, those country codes can get a domain totally in their own script, even at the top level. This is intended, of course, to facilitate global use of the internet when an internet user can write the whole domain name, type the whole domain name in their own language. So what do we have now? We have 22 generic top-level domains, and soon there's going to be more. How many more? I don't know. I'm pretty sure that 22 is the wrong number for all time. What's the right number, we're not sure, but part of the genesis of this program was to let the market determine that number and drive to it. What sorts of new gTLDs do we anticipate? There's many potential applications where the potential applicant has already published their intentions. So we have .Paris, .Berlin, .London, .NYC. There's some .brand applicants, .Canon, that have made their potential application public, although most brand holders are playing their strategy, keeping their strategy to themselves. gTLD IDNs are coming. There are several of those that are public, many based around communities. So we expect to see that. What's going on in the ccTLD space? Up until very recently, ccTLD was limited to a two-letter code, as you know. Now we have IDN ccTLDs. Over 20, I think 27 have been delegated, but I'm not sure of the number. And more are in the pipeline. So a very successful fast-track introductory program to introduce the first IDNs into the domain name space. Hugely significant program. So what's a gTLD registry? They have an agreement with ICANN. A registry is the master database of all the names. So that makes registries owners of critical pieces of internet infrastructure. .com, .de, .uk have all very large databases that resolve all the queries through that zone, through that TLD. And so that's why operating a TLD registry requires technical and economic wherewithal and a willingness to undertake a very serious part of internet operation. So what do we hope to get out of the new gTLD program? Well, here's some of the goals that were discussed during the policy development process. We want to include IDN. We want to introduce new gTLDs, including IDNs, so that we can fully realize, or more fully realize, the potential of the internet. Like I said, I think 22 is probably the wrong number. It's intended to facilitate competition and choice for users. It's intended to give a more global reach to the internet, so that we encourage participation from communities, whether they're geographic, language communities, cultural communities, and so on. How long have we been working on this? Well, ICANN has been working on this forever in ICANN life. The original founding documents of ICANN, the white paper published in 1998, said this new corporation, it wasn't named yet, should oversee a policy for determining the circumstances under which new TLDs are added to the root. So ICANN has essentially been working on new TLDs for 13 years. As many of you know, ICANN has had a series of agreements with the U.S. Department of Commerce, and each one, the instruction of ICANN's duty there was to define and implement a strategy for the introduction of new gTLDs. So what's the timeline been? Well, in 1998, there were seven generic top-level domains. In 2000, there was a trial round to introduce more gTLDs. It was quite an exciting time. There were about 55 applicants. Some people in this room were there. requesting a much greater number of TLDs, and in a public meeting, the ICANN board sorted through the applications and picked 7. So that was a sort of an ad hoc, raucous process for the introduction of new TLDs. You can imagine that. In 2004, there was another trial round, and another 7, actually 8 now, TLDs were introduced. These were limited, though. They were only allowed to be sponsored or type of community TLD, so only that sort of application was accepted. After that, ICANN seriously undertook an effort to really open up this domain space and launched a policy development process that was started in 2005 and lasted for about 21 months. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. We sought to implement that policy and publish the applicant guidebook. Little did we know when we published the first one that there would be 7 versions of the guidebook published, each iterated carefully with public comment. The board approved that guidebook on June 20th of this year, and the program is going to go live and applications are going to be accepted right at the start of next year. So what was this process ICANN went through? Well, in ICANN's bottom-up process, the GNSO undertook a 21-month intensive bottom-up effort, all by volunteers. So volunteers attending ICANN meetings 3 times a day, then intersessional meetings between, countless phone calls, emails, very passionate positions on all this. This work was informed by several working groups. There's an IDN working group, Protection of Rights working group, a reserved name working group to determine which name should not be delegated ever. ICANN's advisory committees all chipped in. The Government Advisory Committee published their principles on new gTLDs. And the conclusions were that came out of this long policy development process. Why are we doing TLDs? Because the internet community came together and after 2 trial rounds had an extended 21-month discussion about it and came to certain conclusions across almost all DNS communities that new gTLDs should be launched, that they would provide benefit, that they would broaden internet or DNS participation, and they would increase choice and competition. The policy direction was that IDN should be included in this launch, that the launch take place in a way that doesn't create stability or security issues for the DNS. There was direction on how names should be allocated and what the criteria should be. So, for example, they'll be launched in rounds, and they should not be limited in categories in order to realize the full benefit. And that certain important issues should be protected. What are they? The policy creators specifically identified that intellectual property rights be protected, community interests, there'd be limited safeguards around sensitive names, that user confusion should be avoided, and that the interests of governments should be taken into account. What's that all mean? Well, we'll go into it a little bit in a minute. So we took that policy, and now we have to implement it. And that implementation is embodied in the applicant guidebook. And so I just want to pause for a second and say what was very rich about this policy was that when the volunteer policymakers were considering different issues with the policy, they came to the whole internet community, they came to ICANN staff and tested their ideas. Will this work? What if we had developed a policy that said this? Is it implementable? That process continued during the implementation. So when ICANN staff started writing this applicant guidebook, which is, as almost everybody in this room knows, is the direction manual for how to apply for a new gTLD, the ICANN staff continually went back to the policymakers and said, is this what you intended at this part? So what was the result of that long conversation? It was 7 versions of the guidebook, iteration with the community over and over again. Compare that to a regulatory model where a regulator will post a proposed regulation, have a comment period, have a public hearing, and promulgate the rules. So, there's a real good advertisement for the ICANN model that we don't rush. We stop and make sure all arguments are heard and considered before going ahead. There were 47 extended comment periods where 2,400 comments were received, 55 explanatory memo and independent reports, including several economic studies covering whether or not there should be price controls in new gTLDs, how the marketplace should be organized, and the benefit of new gTLDs. Extended consultation with ICANNs technical advisory committees, the development of many specific processes for resolving disputes. And then finally, some rights protection mechanisms and malicious conduct mitigation measures. So I'm just going to talk about these for a minute, but I don't think Steve has already touched on these, and so I won't spend a long time. Except that, sorry. What do you do when you publish a version of the guidebook and the intellectual property community comes to you and says, there's no rights protection measures, we need some? What would you do? Well, what ICANN did is we convened a group of 18 intellectual property experts from all over the world, and that group came together, and intensive is overused, but in a very intensive effort, worked together to create a suite of rights protection mechanisms. So the model is go to the world's expert, and one of the joys of working at ICANN is you get access to those kinds of people. And these people came together and developed a set of rights protection mechanisms in several face-to-face meetings involving a lot of travel. Then those mechanisms were tested in online fora where there were hundreds of comments, in face-to-face meetings in Sydney, New York, and London, and Seoul. And then after that, ICANN convened a multidisciplinary team of its policymakers to examine the policy aspects of that. And then after that, ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee met with the ICANN board and actually worked to strengthen the recommendations and made the rights protection mechanism stronger. So I'm just trying to paint a picture here, and I'm not a good painter, of the richness of the ICANN model and how it can work and how it can be used to solve very difficult problems. It's kind of amazing, I think. And the result is a set of trademark protections at the top level. So when you apply for a new gTLD, does that top level string potentially affect or infringe on intellectual property rights? And then where actually there's more concern is at the second level. So once there's a new TLD, will cyber squatters or others register names at the second level to infringe on rights? So at the top level, well, there's coffee. At the top level, what are the protections? Well, there's objections, and my reading of the intellectual property community on this is that they've always been fairly comfortable with protections at the top level. That there's an objection process if a name is registered that will infringe on an existing name. So, Steve Crocker brought up the example of Apple. Can somebody other than Macintosh or Apple register .apple? Well, of course, if they have a legitimate interest in the name. So in the United States, we have the Washington State Apple Growers Association. So we always use them as an example. So there's forms of objection at the top level when there's an application. There's an infringement of legal rights objection. If you're using a community label, there can be an objection against that, say, of an ethnic group. There's a limited public interest objection for sensitive strings, and there's an objection if we think a name is overly confusing with an existing name. So how does the process work? From the past, we've learned the objections have to be very specific only on these issues. And then how are they resolved? Well, they're resolved through an independent dispute resolution process. So if a rights holder objects to a domain name, that applicant and the rights holder goes off in a room with an arbiter, and they resolve the issue there and come out and tell the world what's happened. There's another form of potential input to the board at the top level, and that is ICANN's Government Advisory Committee will be giving advice to the board if certain strings are found overly sensitive to governments. And then at the second level, I said I wasn't going to take a long time on rights protection. Huh? At the second level, rights protection mechanisms are important because we need to mitigate the need for defensive registrations that's viewed as a high cost by trademark owners and lower the cost of protecting trademarks overall. And so how do we do that? Well, there's more about this later, not in this talk, thankfully. But Steve described them too. There's a trademark clearinghouse where registered trademark holders will only have to register their name once for all new TLDs and be in the trademark. And what will that buy them? That will buy them access to a mandatory sunrise process where all registries have to give first dibs on a name to names registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse. It also lets trademark holders participate in an IP claims process whereby all registries will have to provide notice to any potential registrant at the second level if they're registering a name that's registered in the clearinghouse. So that registrant gets notice, says, beware, somebody's registered that mark, so go into this with your eyes open. Other new protections for this are a uniform rapid suspension system intended to be a cheap, quick takedown process for names that are clearly infringing the rights of others. There's a mandatory requirement that registries maintain a thick who is database. That means they keep a lot more of the registrant information in their database that will be accessible to those seeking to find wrongdoers. And finally, there's a new process, a post-delegation process, where those who have had their rights infringed, if they think the registry is actually taken a part in that, can go right after the registry themselves, not just after the domain name holder. So potentially a very powerful tool. At the end of the day, what do we think? Well, we like to think that we're creating an environment where there won't be more infringement because there's a multiplication of names, or there won't be a multiplication of malicious conduct just because there's more names. But actually, we're creating a safer environment. That these new protection mechanisms, combined with other changes in the DNS, will make it a safer place to be. So when you take this home and read it again because you found it so interesting, this is my favorite graphic of how rights protection mechanisms fit into the registry lifecycle. What malicious conduct mitigations have been put in place? How do we solve this problem? We did it the same way. We convened a group of experts from the Anti-Phishing Working Group, FIRST, which is a first responders, the Registry Internet Security Group, RISG, I think that's what it stands for. Anyway, it was great. So we get the world's security and stability experts and put them in a room to develop malicious mitigation measures for the new gTLD program. And these are implemented in the program now. Enhanced background checks, disclosure if you've had trouble with infringing rights in the past. You must be ready to deploy DNSSEC. You must be ready to deploy IPv6. No wildcarding is allowed, and I'll explain that to anybody at coffee break. In addition, in certain cases, we have to remove glue records from the zone, and I don't want to talk about that either because I only understand part of it. The requirement from thick whois I described, and here you'll see a couple more abuse mitigation measures that we think, again, will make this a safer environment at the end. I'll just talk about the last two, an expedited registry security request process. If a registry sees malicious conduct, it can actually come to ICANN and say, we want to violate our contract and go after those guys. Is it all right, ICANN? And we have a process for rapidly considering that. We also have created a mechanism so people looking for wrongdoers can get at registry data in a centralized way. So it gives another tool in the law enforcement and IP protection toolbox. So, applying or not for a new gTLD. Is it me, or do I just not press hard enough? So when? The application for new gTLDs will open in the middle of January, January 12th, and close 90 days later on April 12th. I want to socialize an important date in that. It's March 29th, and you'll see that working into our presentations. That's where you have to reserve your slot in the new gTLD process. So there has to be a notification to ICANN that you want to apply by March 29th. What's the evaluation process? Come back tomorrow. I've already talked too much for you today, I know. But tomorrow there'll be a session that Olaf Nordling and I will conduct that go through some of the details of the application, and more importantly, the evaluation process. How is your application evaluated once it's received? What's the timeline? It's a blank sheet of paper. Okay. January through April, ICANN will receive applications. The processing of applications will take place April through November, so that's a really long time. What takes so long? There's a period of due diligence to ensure that the application is complete. There's processing the applications through an initial evaluation process that is actually 7 separate checks or tests, and we'll talk more about those tomorrow. And I'm going to tell you about some exceptions to this timeline when I get done. Once an application is approved or accepted, there's a transition to delegation. What's that mean? That means you enter into an agreement, or you execute an agreement with ICANN, and that you go through the IANA delegation process and actually get put in the root zone. So we expect to see the first TLDs in operation either right at the end of 2012 or at the beginning of 2013. Now here's a big caveat. If ICANN receives more than 500 applications, there'll be a batching process, and more about that later. So that part of this evaluation may even take longer. That batching process is in place for quality assurance purposes. We want to ensure consistency across all the evaluations, and it's important to pay attention to span of control. So you know, I'm an old manufacturing guy, and if you have to build 1,000 things, you don't get 1,000 people each to build one. You take care, carefully train a workforce and have them work, have a limited trained workforce. So we struck a balance between getting applications done as quickly as possible, but ensuring the quality of that delegation. Just a couple more slides. One is, you know, if you're wondering whether or not to apply for a new gTLD, you know, we're expecting so many hundred applications or more. But there's 3 billion internet users that aren't applying for new TLD. And the benefits of the new TLD program are mainly intended for all the internet users, not the few that are applying for new TLDs. So when considering that, consider the benefits and the risks associated with the changes that are coming to the new domain place, even if you're not applying for a new top-level domain. There'll be new business opportunities. There'll be new services available to you. If you have a brand or trademark, there'll be new opportunities for protecting that mark, new risks to that mark. How do you take advantage of this new environment? So it's very important for all of us, I'm not applying for new TLD, to look at the new space and see what opportunities there are out there to facilitate new business models or facilitate growth in the DNS. So here's some more information. If you have questions, write to that new gTLD mailbox. It works pretty darn good. You get your question answered right away. There's a very competent person that's managing, Trang Nguyen, that's managing that process. And when she can't answer a question, we have a weekly meeting and all sit around the table and throw the questions on the table and, you know, chuckle at them. But then, write cogent answers for all the questions. So it's a departure from, if you're familiar with, if you have an ICANN buddy, calling them, but it's a necessary step. But I think that the new mailbox works pretty well. The new gTLD's website is brand new and shiny. It's got great color and banners, but it has all the information that was always there. It's just easier to find. So at the end, what are the magic words we want to say? Well, we're going to be conducting this process and enforcing agreements. We're going to conduct a reliable, transparent, predictable, and timely process. And at the end, with new gTLDs, we're going to enforce agreement to do what? To do all the things we tell people we do at cocktail parties. That we're going to ensure the ongoing stability and security of the domain name system. We're going to work to protect the legal rights of others, promote competition, choice, new opportunities, new services, and we want to continue to build, using this as an example, continue to build the ICANN multi-stakeholder model that's been so effective in building this process. It couldn't have been done anywhere else in the world. So thank you very much for your time and sitting through that.
Thank you very much, Kurt Pritz. I'm going to ask you to stay up here because we have a little bit of time for questions. So if you're willing to take a few of those, bearing in mind that he will be back again tomorrow, so we can ask some of our questions tomorrow. But maybe I'll just start out. If we were at this proverbial cocktail party, then what I would have been saying to you is, okay, that all sounds great from the point of view of the potential applicants, brand holders, and so on. Maybe I can, see the benefits in this. But what about for me as a user? I'm already getting confused when I'm surfing the net and trying to find this or that. Is there not a danger, and I know this was raised at many points during that 7-year consideration process, that the entire domain name space could splitter into a million fragments and become really impenetrable for a lot of users?
Where's the bar?
Out there.
So we're at a cocktail party, right? So it's a good question. At a very basic level, new gTLDs has a very direct effect on ongoing internet stability and security. There's a lot of pressure for new gTLDs, and we've heard, ICANN, but a lot of people in this room have heard pressure that says, if we don't develop a new way to launch new TLDs, and particularly IDNs, certain entities will go off and form their own root zone. They'll form an alternate route. So the introduction of new TLDs is one way to relieve that pressure, that demand, whereby those entities that were threatening to launch root zones are actually going to stay within the single interoperable root zone that's so valuable to us all that when you type it in an address, it goes to one place. It's a unique address. So in that case, this is where girls usually leave me at cocktail parties. So in that case, we think it's valuable. How's the domain name space going to change? Well, it could be more confusing. It could become simpler. Steve had one example, and I've already forgotten what it is. But if you're going to .canon, as announced, they're likely to apply for new gTLD. You're pretty darn sure that second-level names associated with .canon are reliable. And so we've adapted pretty fast. The internet's pretty young, and we will adapt, I think, to this new way. Search engines will change to make it easier for you. I mean, there's a whole marketplace out there that wants to get you to where you want to go, so they can sell you stuff or tell you their community message. So I think that's kind of the answer.
So was the pressure that you mentioned the main impetus for doing this back then when you decided to embark on this, in the end, rather lengthy process? What was the main motivation?
Well, as I said, it was part of ICANN's part of ICANN's DNA right at the very start, that the bunch of people that got in the room and said that the U.S. Department of Commerce was not the right place to do internet governance, that it should be a private company that could address the world's needs, or attempt to address the world's needs, should seek to encourage competition and choice. And they identified two ways of doing that. One is in the registrar space, where there was one registrar now, there's now 980-something of them, and the price of a domain name's gone from $75 to $10. And in introducing new top-level domains. So that was a start. But then, where did the impetus really came from? It really is a bottom-up process. It was this ICANN internet community, all different stakeholders, from intellectual property, business, non-commercial guys, registries, registrars, internet service providers, governments coming together and creating this policy recommendation that said as a policy there should be more new top-level domains. We think the domain namespace will be a better place and there'll be more opportunity if there's more TLDs. So it really came from the group of volunteers that came to the conclusion that the DNS would better fulfill its role if there were more TLDs. And then this saving the whole internet was just an unintended benefit.
I want to come right to the audience for one more question, and this harks back perhaps also to Dr. Crocker's, the kids in the car and my parents saying 3 more hours. You mentioned the fact that you're not sure how many applications you're going to get. You're not sure whether you're going to have to batch them. You've got that timeline up there. But when you tell us 3 more months, 3 more hours, 1 more year, can we be sure that that's going to be the case?
So I have 3 kids, and there's not going to be any more. Yeah, so it's a problem, but it's a tractable problem. We're building a flexible organization, you know, a hierarchical organization where the number of evaluators can grow and shrink, but the management structure stays the same to address as many applications as we receive. And the idea of batching them in groups of 500 puts a finite limit on how that workspace is going to expand. So at least, like I said, I was a manufacturing guy, and so at least for me, it's a problem I've solved in my career that here's the design, we have to build so many of these things, we have to build them by this date, and we figure out the resources. So it's more of a finite problem really than policy development. And I think everybody knows, but ICANNs built this really capable group under Mike Salazar, who has a fairly substantial organization that is just not processing applications, but it's governance of the program, a quality assurance function, a finance function, a communications and user support function. So it's a now well-established organization that's going to look forward to receiving these applications and evaluating them.
Great. Questions out there? Please raise your hands. Yeah. You do not have microphones. Oh, but here I see we have a hand microphone. That's great. Okay. And do tell us who you are, please.
I'm Elaine Pruis with Minds and Machines. Hi, Kurt. I want to know if you guys at ICANN have gotten any closer to figuring out how you will batch applications.
So we're very close on that. You would not be surprised to know there are some legal issues tied up in how batching is done, and so we're wrapping around that, and we're coming to a conclusion very soon. Well, you can make them up. So we have a lot of fun with this. We have the foot race. So we could have put all the applicants and let them run around the block and see whoever finishes first get one. It's objective. There are certain classifications of TLDs that could go first. IDNs, community TLDs. There's some sort of first come, first serve notion. As I say these, many people in the audience will recognize problems with each one. There's a random process where they could just be chosen. There could be a semi-random process where they're chosen but then coupled with like TLDs so one doesn't hold up the others. So those are some of the options.
Rolf Larsen from Cloud Names. So I understand that there's technical testing of about 1,000 new top-level names. And what if you receive more applicants than 1,000? Of course, we would be lucky, all of us, if you did. But would that impose any problems, or is that just prolonging the process in time? Yeah,
so right to the point, it'll prolong the process in time because we'll do batches of 500. As a matter of fact, I think it's 500, 400, and 400 like that because some of the original 500 will still be in the pipe.
Back here in the back.
Paul Toomey, formerly with ICANN. Kurt, can I just ask you to differentiate between batching and triage? So when you say you're likely to batch, does that mean you'll triage the group first against a set of criteria for the batching, or will you just simply take a batch? And if I give an illustration, there might be applicants from people who just wish to park a domain, park a TLD, for whom time doesn't mean anything. The application process is what satisfies their need. There might be others who there might be venture capital backed where time is real money. There's a distinction between those two as classes. Is there going to be any triage process before you batch?
So are you recommending that part of the batching process would be to identify those who don't really care if they go ahead in the first round as a possible way to run that?
You're putting words in my mouth.
Yeah.
Well, one could observe that you said manufacturing is one model. One could take a hospital as another, and where you've got a capacity constraint on processing, triage as a mechanism, and people's. I would suspect that applicants have different needs, and those needs can be defined in time.
Hospital is just a bad metaphor, you know. A place where gTLD applications go to die.
I didn't say battlefield.
So, Paul, there is an interest, though, and there is something in the guidebook that, and I forget the exact requirement, that TLD operations actually become live after a certain time. And so while you can't guarantee these things, the process is trying to encourage people to get TLDs because they're going to use them, not because they're going to park them. But I got your suggestion.
Hi, this is Katrin Dormer from .zone. One question with regards to the applicant support. Do you have any idea about the process where applicants can apply for the applicant support program? Because right now we see the final report of the group, but we haven't seen the process.
Right. So I'm sure you're up to speed on this, and other people, for other people in this room. As sort of a late-breaking story, ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee and also its at-large community has urged ICANN to take on the issue of supporting needy applicants or applicants from developing countries as a way to give the new gTLD program even broader support or broader participation to help those that ordinarily wouldn't be able to apply for a gTLD. And so the community formed a working group, a joint applicant support working group, that has recently published its report that made a number of recommendations for fee reductions, technical support for applicants, and starting registries and other kinds of support. And so there's some tasks that are being done now. One is the ICANN board's committed to allocating a $2 million seed fund to get that started, with the idea that similar contributions might come from other quarters. And in fact, I'll tell you that we've met with other entities that might provide more support. So ICANN's working behind the scenes to facilitate that. In parallel with that, though, a process is being developed, a potential process is being developed. The JAS report suggested criteria by which applicants are measured. So right now, ICANN staff is taking the recommendations of the JAS, applying some operational restrictions around that, and developing a candidate process that will be discussed at ICANN's meeting in Dakar and potentially launch there. We'll see how it goes.
More questions? Here in the...
Thomas Laufersweiler, ARD Online. After 2013, when will be the next time, the next opportunity to get our own top-level domain?
So I think it's really important to understand that the plan is to have follow-on rounds for new TLDs, and that it is a key to relieving some of the pressure around this initial round, that there'll be another bite at that apple. When we started this process, we talked a lot about, launching the second round by a certain date. That discussion, that conversation evolved over time as the community talked about various issues associated with launching the round in the first place. One was stability and security issues. So advice received from the community said, have your first round, stop, see if there's any stability and security issues in the domain name system or the root server system. Ensure there's not, and go ahead. The Government Advisory Committee said, have your first round and look at trademark protections and see if improvements can be made to the trademark protections. We'll make some accommodations and some concessions, but then let's test. So ICANN has never gotten away from its commitment to having a second round, but what has been said is that we're going to do certain things before we launch that second round. My personal opinion is those things aren't difficult. Do I personally envision stability and security issues with the root server system associated with the introduction of this number of new TLDs? I think no. So I think those things will be overcome, but I think there's going to be some community discussion around it.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Delmeyer. I have a question. Do you know approximately how many applicants are going to be there? So I'm an INTA member, and there's approximately 6,000 members. Not all of them are brand owners, but there are a lot of brands out there. Now, I have the feeling that there's going to be more than maybe 1,000, 1,500 applications. Is there any number, just approximately, what's out there?
So our numbers come from people like you getting up in meetings and giving information like that. So, when we first started, we guessed, this is how long this has been going on, so we guessed 500 plus or minus 400. And then the economy went down and we said 300, and now it's here. And, you're back from the INTA meeting, and there's there's some pressures on this round because there's uncertainty about the second round, and so I've heard numbers like yours. So thanks for your estimate, and it's part of the database now.
Back here.
Morning, Kurt. Tony Kirsch from Oz Registry. I've been doing this for 3 years, travelling the world like many of my counterparts in this room, and teaching people about new top-level domains and the opportunity that they present. And fundamentally, after you've got through that process, it ends in 2 questions. When can I have it? And how much is it going to cost? I think you're getting very close to the question of when can I have it. The timelines are fantastic, and I would encourage you, and I can, based upon this potential for first come, first served in the batching, that's a significant impact to people in their processes now. So I'd encourage you, if you can, to get through that. My question is more around the how much is it going to cost? And one component that is rarely talked about is this letter of credit or continued operations instrument. So my question specifically is, I know that ICANN's doing some work at the moment with the emergency back-end registry operator. There is a detailed process now of what the continued operations instrument looks like, but is there a propensity for that to change based upon the information you're receiving from the emergency back-end operators? Because that really impacts, again, that question of how much is it going to cost?
I thought we were speaking English here.
Sorry, that was Australian.
First come, first serve is really awkward and would encourage a crush of applications right at the start of the process and people not taking the full amount of time. So it's not a really attractive option, but I was trying to lay out the different options that were considered for Elaine. It's not expected that this emergency backend service provider process will change much. It was developed in collaboration with gTLD and CCTLD registries, and so we we worked with them for two reasons, obviously, right? One is their technical expertise, and two is, what's kind of politically palatable and feasible for how to operate this. And so we're fairly comfortable that the work that's been done and the papers that have been done are close to what's going to happen at the end. And then when we receive responses to that request for information, that'll be accompanied by cost information and provide a level of certainty.
One more back here. Can you raise your hand, please? Yeah.
Hi, Kurt. Jean-Christophe V, New Open Registry. Just coming back to the so-called second round, because I came back from an INTA meeting last week in Washington, where people were really looking forward to round two. So it strikes me as a bit odd because we've seen how long it took for round one to materialize. I would like people not to have the wrong impression and believe, oh, round two is just around the corner, so just wait a bit. Can you elaborate on that? I mean, round two is a great concept. I just don't want people to have a false hope, if you will.
So I'll say what's out there in public, that the GNSO, as part of their policy recommendation, discussed in their report the launch of a second round to follow closely on the first. I think that talk I've seen said that a second round is important, but I'll also tell you that there are certain prerequisites to the second round, right? There's this investigation of trademark effectiveness. There's this question about stability and security in the root server system. So I think you know as much as I do about all the factors that weigh in on this, and also you have vast experience with the ICANN community. But I think it's important for ICANN going forward, and we'll see. We'll work with the board to determine the best way to do this, but to provide assurances about a second round, or at least more information and certainty about the second round. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I think maybe we'll just leave it there, although I can't resist asking one final question. Maybe this is the last one I do at the cocktail party before we go back to the bar. What does it cost? We know that, at least on paper, it's going to cost quite a bit. Registration fee, quite high. We also know that ICANN is a very benevolent, non-for-profit, bottom-up corporation. So where's all that money going to go?
So it's good. So this is tomorrow's stuff, but it's a cost recovery fee. So we rather carefully, as carefully as possible in an environment with some uncertainty, calculated how much it's going to cost to process applications. I'll tell you that application fees of $55,000 in the past was clearly not enough. ICANN wound up in negative land there. We've expanded the number of inquiries that are being done. So there's a string stability evaluation, a string similarity evaluation, a technical and financial evaluation, a registry services evaluation, a couple more. So 7 different evaluations, an opportunity for extended evaluation if you don't pass the first time. And so the evaluation fee, and then included in that fee are some risk costs. So there's a 0.5% chance of this happening, but if it happens, it's going to cost $10 million. And so you add up all those percentages and get a net value of those things, and add those costs in. And at the end of the day, that's what it costs. You can think about a lot of things, right? You can think about some second-level domain names go for millions of dollars. So, in many cases, $185,000 will be a bargain. Think about, too, some of the unintended benefits. A lot of abuse occurs in the domain name space now because you can buy a domain name for $10. And then if you get caught, you just throw the domain name over the window. I think parties will be much less likely to buy names, acquire names for abusive purposes when there's $185,000 US on the table. That in itself is sort of a malicious conduct prevention measure. So there's, I've got a couple more points that aren't coming to mind. But anyway, it's calculated at the cost, and there's some other benefits associated with it, I think.
Thank you very, very much, Court Pritz, for that. Also very extended Q&A, quite spontaneous. We appreciate that very much. Everybody who has additional questions, as I say, you get lots of time to pose them during the course of the day, and especially in our session at the end. But a warm thanks, first of all, to Court Pritz. And just a little promo, if you didn't find out enough yet about what those protective mechanisms will be for your brand, then do come back to Channel A right after the break, because we'll be talking some more about protecting your brand. But now we do have time for a cup of coffee, and let's meet again at 11 o'clock to get started. Thanks a lot.